Visit of French President Emmanuel Macron in Washington. Now, along with saving the Iran nuclear deal, the other big Mideast issue that Macron has been pushing is the future of Syria. From the French president, a clear plea for Washington to join more vigorously in reaching a political solution to the Syrian conflict, one that will ensure stability in the war-torn nation and prevent Iranian entrenchment.
Not an easy feat, to say the least. And from President Trump, a mixed message reiterating his commitment to pull U.S. troops from Syria, but suggesting his administration will make greater efforts towards a regional solution, whatever that might be. Joining us right here in the studio is Brigadier General in retirement Hana Gefen, a former commander of Israel's elite 8200 intelligence unit. And joining us from Washington is Lawrence Korb, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. But, gentlemen, before we get into the conversation, let's hear a little bit of what has been said about Syria over the last 24 hours.
As far as Syria is concerned, I would love to get out. I'd love to bring our incredible warriors back home. They've done a great job. We've essentially just absolutely obliterated ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And we've done a big favor to neighboring countries, frankly, but we've also done a favor for our country. So we want to come home. We'll be coming home. But we want to have a very, very strong, we want to leave a strong and lasting footprint, and that was a very big part of our discussion.
Let's start with Lawrence Korb in Washington. Let's just listen. I mean, we just heard Trump saying that in that joint press conference yesterday. He says, we want to be coming home, we will be coming home, but we want a lasting footprint. What do you make of that message? What is the policy?
Yeah, what he's trying to say is eventually we will come home, but unlike what he said about 2 weeks ago, he's not saying, you know, in a matter of weeks or months, because the Secretary of Defense, Mattis, has, you know, persuaded him that you have to protect what you've done so far. You don't want ISIS to come back. And also, if you want a seat at the table, you got to be there. If we withdraw, we're not going to have any say in the future negotiations.
Hanan, both leaders speaking out against Iranian entrenchment in Syria, which must be positive for Israel. But President Trump suggesting some kind of regional solution that will involve countries like Saudi Arabia. He mentioned Turkey. Is that something Israel is going to be comfortable or confident with?
Well, let's look at the policy that, because we have to see the bigger picture, because we have here 3 different players in this game. You recall last week that Nikki Haley said something about sanctioning Russia, and then the day after that, President Trump said he's not going to sanction. Right. So it's not that Trump doesn't know what he's saying. Something happened in these 24 hours. So what happened is probably a move between Russia and the U.S., and then Russia and then Trump agreed to withhold the sanction until something happened. So we have to see it in this context. On the other hand, we see other players. We see Iranians under tremendous pressure. You know, they are using language that we were not used to hear in the past. Yeah. You hear their military guys threatening U.S. naval vehicles in the Gulf, in Persian Gulf. We hear Rouhani saying something about Trump. He's a constructor. He's not a politician. A language we didn't hear. So they are getting under tremendous pressure. And then we heard just today, the French are the first European that agreed to change the agreement. Right. So something is happening, is boiling in. And I would say that Trump is setting the pace. He's setting the pace. Russia, Iranian, and French. And the pace is very clear. He said, I want to see this area clear of ISIS, which was traditionally, but he mentioned also the Iranians. You know, there are 4 goals against the Iranians.
Right, the 4 pillars, like Macron said.
So in this context, getting back to your question, Israel feels much better in this new posture the United States take. United States has a much central or pivotal role in the Middle East than we used to see it in the past.
That's a pretty optimistic view, Lawrence, from what we hear sometimes here in the studio in terms of the U.S. role abroad. Do you agree? Is Trump setting the pace on all those fronts?
Well, what you hope is that he will, despite his rhetoric. The thing about Trump, I think to keep in mind, he has no fixed positions, and he appeals to his base by saying things and then doesn't do them. If you take a look, for example, in Afghanistan, he said, I'm getting out and all this. By the time it was over, he actually added more troops and didn't put a deadline. And I think the thing that Macron was probably telling him, you know, if you get out of Syria, Iran is going to do well. And boy, when it comes to Iran, you know, he really, really reacts very, very, very negatively to anything that they're trying to do.
Hanan, you expressed some optimism in terms of reaching an accommodation with the Russians. But over the past week, they've been keep threatening to bring in the S-300 into Syria. We've seen the head of CENTCOM make an unusual visit to Israel. Defense Minister Lieberman is in Washington right now. Those are signs, are they not, though, of some nervousness here in Israel over what's developing there?
Again, I differentiate between what we say and what is happening, because, you know, the SA-300 is threat not only to Israel, it's also for the American, the French, and whoever fly over Syria. So so the Russian will be very hesitant to deploy the last version of the SA-300. That might be some earlier version, if at all. It might be some advanced anti-aircraft, because the players in the area are not the Israelis only. We are not the major player here. The Americans are. You have to recall that the Saudis are involved. So Russian decision is not only against Israel. It will be. They have to include everything. And remember, there's the sanctions threat that President Trump is withholding. They'll be very careful using the SS-300 because the economy, I believe, is vulnerable, and they know it. So this is another card that Trump, I believe, playing very skillfully.
Lawrence, I want to ask you about Israel, like we're talking about. We see two very high-level meetings happening right now between U.S. and Israeli officials, presumably Israel trying to get some reassurances about what is happening in Syria. Do you think they're going to get it from the Trump administration?
Well, I think they're going to get it from the military people, and I think then the military people are going to be able to convince Trump. As I said, if you go back and look at Afghanistan, they were able to convince him to stay there, and we have a much larger footprint in Afghanistan than we have in Syria. And fortunately, there have been, you know, almost no American casualties there. And I think with the allies, you know, willing to put up some more money, you know, to help rebuild it, that will assuage Trump by saying, you know, the rest of the world is taking advantage of them, we're paying all of the bills. So I think that they will, and particularly given the fact that if we leave, not just the Russian, but the Iranian influence there, which is really the problem for Israel. We got to hope that his relations with Russia, they can lean on the Iranians. And I know we have good relations because when we bombed here, you know, about 10 days ago, we communicated with the Russians. We didn't hit any of the places where the Russians were.
Right. All right. Well, hope seems to be a key word in what you're saying. A lot of variables still in the air, obviously. Lawrence Korb, Washington Brigadier General Hana Gefen.